Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sarah, and I'm a final year PhD student at University College London. I'm interested in how neighbourhood design can impact well-being and exploring what characteristics of the surrounding environment can contribute to better well-being. I study how people interact with the built environment, and my research particularly looks at how adolescents interact and feel in green spaces. Building on this information, we can then design better public green space, which could lead to outcomes such as more inclusive public space for adolescents, better cohesion for neighbourhoods, and safer and healthier neighbourhoods for younger people to grow up in. So a good place to start is by defining what adolescence is. Now, traditionally, there has been no universal or consistent term that has been used in urban design research. Looking at the definition that the World Health Organization has provided suggests that adolescents are a homogeneous group which range from the ages of 10 to 19 years, which seems to be a large bracket. However, we know that adolescence is characterized by many changes and transitions and heterogeneity. So this is a period where they're going through hormonal changes, hormonal shifts, cognitive development. The brain is also constantly developing during this period, and there are many transitions. So, a younger adolescent could be going from primary school to secondary school, and an older adolescent may be sitting their GCSE exams, and another older adolescent may be transitioning from secondary to sixth form and college. So this period is quite turbulent and it's not static. With this knowledge in mind, for my research, I've broken down adolescents into different age groups. So I've got younger adolescents and older adolescents to capture a more accurate picture of what's going on in this period. And I think this illustration on the right helps us understand these different developmental phases. So on the slide are my two definitions of younger and older adolescents that I've used throughout my research. So younger adolescents are referred to as 12 to 14-year-olds, and older ones are referred to as 15 to 17-year-olds. You may also find that I refer to some of the adolescents by their year group at school. So year 7s are considered as younger adolescents, and year 11s would be considered as older adolescents. And this is mainly due to some of the recruitment being made from secondary schools for some of the participants. So London is where my research is based, and I think London provides a good case study of urban green space to explore, due to how much green space it has in the city, but also due to its population of young people. Around 20% of the city is green space, which makes up more than all of its roads and railways combined. And in 2019, it was even given the nickname of the world's first national park city, given how much green space it has. So whilst we know we have a lot of green space, what we don't know much about is the quality of these spaces and what they need to look like for people. So this personal relationship that people have with green spaces is important and is a gap that I identified in the literature very early on, and I've decided to take up for my PhD. In particular, the quality and the relationships that young people have with green spaces is best explored on an individual level. So I was interested to go out and talk to young people about their experiences and their perceptions of urban green spaces. Yet despite having all this quantity of green space, we still see high levels of health problems in young people, such as mental health problems, obesity levels increasing, and physical activities plummeting. So there seems to be more that needs to be explored in this relationship between green space and well-being. And if there is a relationship in young people, green spaces seem to be a factor that are malleable and that we can change around to benefit people. How a park or green space looks like will determine how people use and therefore what needs they are getting met from these spaces. So from these images, you can see that if there are chairs available for use, we may be more likely to use the space to relax. If the grass is cut, we may be more likely to use the space to play, run around in, play football in. And if the paths are clear and walkable, we may be more likely to go for a walk and get our steps in. The previous literature has been very good at documenting what benefits green spaces can provide. So for example, there are cognitive benefits that we see after taking a stroll in the park, a lower risk of diabetes and obesity in adult women who live closer to parks and green spaces, and also the social connections that we can form in green space and the physical activity levels that we can meet in green spaces. However, this relationship has predominantly been explored in adults, with some little research exploring children. What seems to be missing are the adolescents. So a question remaining to be explored is, do adolescents see the same benefits of green spaces? But there is a bit before this that we need to explore to understand more about this relationship between green space and health and well-being, which is this personal, qualitative relationship that adolescents have with green spaces. And by understanding this, we can then understand the underlying needs that they get met from these spaces, and then look at how this may lead to positive or negative effects for their well-being. So the best way to explore these sorts of qualitative questions is to go out there and speak to adolescents themselves. I conducted a total of 6 focus groups over the course of 2 years, between spring 2021 and autumn 2023, across 2 different boroughs in London. There were a few differences between the focus groups. So, for example, in Barking and Dagenham, the focus groups were held over Zoom, as school policy at the time did not permit outside visitors due to the pandemic. In Haringey, the focus groups were conducted in person and also in a specific park. I conducted some additional observations in Haringey immediately before the focus groups in that specific park that were local to the participants. Participants here were guided to different sections of that park and were given free time to interact with each part. The age groups were slightly different too. So in Barking and Dagenham, I recruited from secondary schools, and then in Haringey, the recruitment was done from local youth groups. So after recording the focus groups, the audio recordings were then transcribed into documents. I then imported these documents into a software called NVivo, which I used to help code and organise my analyses. I then performed a qualitative analysis method called thematic analysis to see what themes were coming up overall and from the different age groups and different genders. Now, this did take a number of rounds, and it was an iterative process, and it did take a while to come up with the final themes. A lot of refining occurred throughout the steps, and a lot of themes were renamed. And I also had a second analysis performed by an independent researcher to validate and make the process more reliable. So overall, the data captured about 12 different themes. They were all interesting, and it was hard selecting which 3 themes to focus on for the purpose of this presentation. However, these 3 themes here demonstrate some of the earlier research questions that I had about adolescents, including the heterogeneity among them, such as gender and age differences, and also this relationship between green space and well-being in adolescence. But before going into more depth, I want to highlight some important concepts that came up for the adolescents. So, safety, restoration, and recreation, the 3 big words that overlap, because these concepts occur together. So for an adolescent to feel relaxed and to feel like they can run around and be free, they also need to feel safe. There were also some gender differences. So we have girls who are more likely to express using green spaces for restoration activities such as relaxing or admiring the aesthetics of nature, whereas boys were more likely to express uses such as playing, running around, and doing sports. So some of the other research outputs that were derived from the data include a snapshot of a female older adolescent from Barking and Dagenham, showing us what specific features she prioritises in urban green space. So the post-it note image where she's highlighted in pink the prioritised features, and that includes things like basketball courts, how it looks, lighting, and park patrols, demonstrate concepts such as safety and aesthetics of green spaces, which is consistent with one of the themes about the gender differences, where girls prioritise the quality of the space. And then on the right-hand side, we have an image that I took during one of my observations in Haringey of 2 older adolescent girls who've climbed to the top of the slide and are just hanging around there and having a conversation between themselves. I think the data from both of the boroughs actually complement each other, so whilst we only got to talk to participants from Barking and Dagenham online, the focus groups in Haringey then provided the opportunity to also observe young people using green spaces in real time, demonstrating some of the issues that would come up earlier in the online focus groups in Barking and Dagenham. So if you remember, one of the first themes was about the competing uses of of green space among younger and older adolescents, so I'll explain more about this in a moment. So the first theme I'm introducing is this competing use between younger and older adolescents in urban green spaces. On one hand, you have older adolescents who feel left out of the design of playgrounds and don't really know what to do there, so end up navigating their own way by either making use of facilities or equipment in a way that is considered fun for them. And this is demonstrated quite clearly by a quote from an older adolescent girl from Barking and Dagenham. The image on the bottom right also illustrates how older adolescents tend to hang about in urban green spaces and do their own thing. This can then lead to uneasy feelings in the younger adolescents who are also using the same space. So then this sort of behaviour can lead to younger adolescents feeling a little bit intimidated by the older adolescents, and that includes just the presence of older adolescents hanging around in the playground and potentially not using the equipment in a way that is intended to be used. And you can see this quite clearly from the image, which I illustrated beforehand, but the image of the two older adolescent girls hanging out at the top of the slide. And the quote from the younger adolescent girl also highlights the need for improving the design of green spaces to make them more inclusive for the different age categories of adolescents. So this second theme is concerned with gender differences between boys and girls and how they use green spaces, and this showed up in the focus groups in a few different ways. So girls prefer relaxation-based activities, whereas boys tend to use green spaces for recreation. And this is a similar trend that previous literature has seen in adults. Girls also express likeness for individual and more one-to-one based activities, such as going for a walk or meeting up with another friend in green space, whereas boys tend to go to green spaces in groups and do more group-based activities, such as sports. And finally, a priority for girls was the aesthetics and the quality of the space. So this means, what does the space look like? Are there pretty trees to look at? Are there pleasant things to look at, such as nature? Whereas for boys, this wasn't really spoken about, and the functionality of the space was more of a priority, and that includes how they would be able to use it. And the third and final theme are self-perceived benefits of green spaces for adolescents. And this was an interesting one because the topic occurred organically without any questions in the topic guide leading to this discussion. In all of the focus groups, in girls and boys, older and younger, they all mentioned some of the benefits that they believe they get out of green spaces, and that includes health, so things like vitamin D, going out into the sun, getting their steps in, getting exercise in, happy feelings, positive feelings, feeling free and de-stressed. Also, on the other hand, there were mentions of mixed feelings in green spaces, such as feeling self-conscious around other adolescents and anxiety around the safety. And the fact that this is something on their mind shows us that adolescents do care about their neighbourhood and the places that they are living in, and probably do have a lot to say about it too. So to give an overview of what we see versus what is occurring for an adolescent in green space, I designed this iceberg illustration based on my findings from the focus groups. The stereotype of adolescents tends to suggest that they are a large group of teens hanging about and being antisocial in green spaces, but what we don't get to see, or what we haven't seen up until now, is that they are young people who are going to green spaces for things like independence, for their well-being and mental well-being, and to get some freedom, to relax and do some physical activity. We also don't get to see that there are some of these missed needs, such as wanting a presence of authority to help them make them feel safe, and the fact that they feel left out of green spaces, which can then lead to them competing for that space. Understanding that adolescence probably needs to be broken down into more representative categories and studied separately can help us meet their needs in public green spaces, which can then overall lead to things like better well-being, better cohesion in neighbourhoods, and safer places for adolescents to grow up in. So that leads to my conclusions. Firstly, it's important to get young people involved, and a natural next step would be to consider what they have to say, so potentially co-designing of green spaces. Secondly, it's important to account for heterogeneity among them and recognise that adolescence is not a homogeneous group. The main differences found in my research were gender and age differences. And finally, by considering people in design and the built environment and talking to them, we can then create places that are meeting underlying needs for people to feel safe, healthy, and thrive in. And that comes to the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for listening and for getting to the end. I've provided my email address on the screen, so if anyone would like to ask any further questions about the research or want to start conversations and discussions about it, please feel free to email me. Thank you.